But I still want to take an opportunity to say something that's very important about what Sondra has been doing for 20 years.
25.
25 years. Right about 20 years with us. This work that Sondra has taken on, I see it as being at the pinnacle of what's relevant for Christians and the people of Israel, Jews, as it relates to the land of Israel. She's been working to build bridges. And you know, we give a lot of lip service sometimes to building bridges. But she's actually gone out to do it, boots on the ground, endeavoring to build these bridges. Many people in Christianity has endeavored to build bridges between the people of Israel, the Jewish people, and Christianity. A lot of those attempts have failed and has been miserable in its effect. Because its beginning, its genesis, it's not from a good place. To build a bridge between Christian groups and Israeli communities, you have to begin from the place of the love of what Zionism is. If you have any other factor there, it's not going to build right. That bridge will not stand. And Sondra has been working diligently at building this bridge, and these bridges, I should say, are in place. So I want us to consider, as we go forward, to really lend support for this mission, for this work. Not just financial support, but prayer. You know, we're a praying congregation. I want to encourage us to keep praying for this ministry. It is valid. To say it's valid, it doesn't suffice. It is essential. Again, it's at the pinnacle of what's relevant between Christian communities and Israeli communities. Okay? So, praise God. So let me introduce Sondra Baras. No introduction needed.
Okay, whatever. Anyway, it's great to be here. It's always such a treat. And I have to say, yes, I've been doing this for 25 years, Pastor Roger. But I met fellowship 6 years before that. Yes. In 1992, there was a delegation from fellowship of two people who are no longer in this church, but they came representing the church to Israel, looking for a place to support. And they found me. This is a crazy story. I don't know if you remember this, Roger, but they found me because I was for this very short period of time, 5 months, I was working in my own community of Carnation Rome, and I was trying to get the word out about how the so-called settlements are really okay. And I was not at all aware of this idea of Christians who love Israel. Not only was I not aware, almost nobody in Israel was aware of it at that time. This was a long time ago. Okay? And so I wrote letters to all the Jewish newspapers in America. No email, no fax. Wrote a letter, put a postage stamp on it, and mailed it. I didn't hear a response from a single one. But it seems that the newspaper... Whoa! Well, anyway, it seems that the newspaper, there was a Jewish newspaper somewhere in this area, that someone working for that paper, whatever, someone working for that paper was part of this church. She's still with you. Christine. She brought the letter to Ken Garrison. She said, look at this letter. So, John Klein and, who's the other guy? David Pavlik came to Israel, and they wrote me a letter, no fax, no email, wrote me a letter. We'd like to meet you. We saw your letter. And the rest is history. Isn't that amazing? That is. So, that's just, a reminder of history. Now, I would like to send around this sign-up sheet, and I know most of you are already on our list, but even if you are, it would be great for me if you could just write your names down so that I can help remember who it is I saw tonight. And certainly if you're not on the list, put your name down because we send out regular information from Israel, and I think you'll love it. And if you don't love it, just unsubscribe. Here you go. And one more thing before I start. I do want to introduce my friend Zelig. Zelig, why don't you come here for a second? So Zelig is about to make aliyah. Isn't that amazing? So I thought I would just ask Zelig to say a few words about why a fellow from New York, he happened to be visiting here while I was going to be here, and we connected, and he said, "Oh, you're speaking in a church? I want to come." I said, "Okay." He wants to see who you guys are that actually love Israel in a church. So anyway, so Zelig, why don't you tell a little bit about who you are?
Sure.
And then you got to give me back the mic, though, because I have a lot to say.
Absolutely. Wow, I'm kind of speechless. I mean, I know that you guys exist. I've seen a couple of communities like this, but the way you were singing the songs in Hebrew and the words, and you have such a pure spirit. I kind of teared up seeing this. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Zelig Krymko-Shmvelovich. I was born in St. Petersburg when it was Leningrad, Russia, not St. Petersburg, Florida. And my parents, they grew up under communism, so they knew they were Jewish. It was actually on their passport because in Russia, in the Soviet Union, when Russia was communist, your ID would say nationality. Russian, Ukrainian, Latvian, Jewish, because Jewish was seen as people who were, people of Judea. They weren't seen as a religion; they were seen as a nation. We were seen as a nation. So they, there was a lot of kind of like discrimination against them when it came to getting jobs in Russia. There was a quota on how many Jews can be in universities and different programs. But the most important thing is the communist country, they closed down most of the synagogues in Russia. They made it illegal to teach Hebrew, to teach the Torah, the Holy Scriptures, to their children. My dad's mom, my grandmother, she used to bake matzah for Passover quietly, secretly in her house, so that for the family, so they could fulfill the commandment of eating matzah for Pesach, for Passover, because she knew this from her parents, from her grandparents. But she could have gotten arrested and sent to jail, to a prison in Siberia for doing this. And there were people who were arrested for this, for doing things like this. My uncle, who's born in Kharkov, which is in the Ukraine, I asked him, did you ever have a bris? Did you have a circumcision when you were a baby? He said, yes, but my parents had to. They lived in a communal apartment. Most of the Soviets lived in communal apartments where 3 or 4 families shared one little apartment. Each family had a room. They had a common kitchen and a common bathroom. Sort of like roommates in New York City, but it was pretty bad. So they basically paid off the Russian with vodka to leave. And then they were able to find somebody who does the circumcisions and bring him in and quietly do a circumcision for my uncle when he was 8 days old. But they had to pay off the Russian alcoholic in their house to leave with extra vodka. So he left so that they wouldn't tell the government that someone's coming and doing a Jewish ritual, because it was illegal. So my parents knew they were Jewish. They loved Israel very much, but they didn't know anything about Judaism. And I grew up, we immigrated in 1978 when I was 1. I grew up in Queens, New York, in a neighborhood called Astoria, which is right across the East River from Manhattan, if anybody knows Astoria, Queens. I grew up in Astoria, and I always knew I was Jewish, but I didn't know much about it. We knew there was matzah on Passover, but it was next to the bread. You know what I mean? Even though we're not allowed to have bread. And the funny thing is, in the Soviet Union, even though religion was illegal, but everyone had Christmas trees. It wasn't a religious thing. It was like a Russian thing to have Christmas trees. They had the concept of Santa Claus. So we actually had Christmas tree. We had a Christmas tree in our house. I remember that. But it wasn't seen as a Christian thing. It was just like a Russian thing. Later on, my parents got involved with the local synagogue, and they realized, okay, so Christmas trees isn't something the Jewish people do in our heritage. Instead, around that time, we had another holiday called Hanukkah, and we had a menorah and all that. We started doing things like that. And then one day, my parents sent me to Orthodox Jewish summer camp. And when I was 11 years old in upstate New York in the Catskill Mountains, about 2 hours north of New York City, because this Orthodox Jewish summer camp put ads in the Russian newspapers. There's a Jewish camp, sports, activities, cultural activities, Hebrew, and they taught me the blessings. I went to public schools. I didn't know anything. So they taught me the alphabet. They taught me how to read Hebrew. Within like a week, I was already reading the Hebrew alphabet. And I want to say that spiritually they saved me because, I didn't know anything. All I knew, we're Jewish. That's all I really knew, And so basically, little by little, I started keeping Shabbat because my counselors from camp started inviting me to their homes in Brooklyn to learn what is Shabbat, what is Pesach, what is Hanukkah, what are all these holidays. And I learned, and I was 12, 13, 14. One day when I was 15 years old, I came home with 2 bags. In one bag, I had my pots and pans and utensils for all my meat stuff. On the other hand, I had all my pots and pans for my dairy stuff. And I said, Mom, I'm going to start keeping kosher. And she was like, what? Are you kidding? Why? I'm like, well, we're Jewish, and this is, I believe, it's in the Torah. It's a commandment. It's a way to connect our soul to God. And I'm going to start keeping kosher. And Mom, can you please buy me kosher meat? And she's like, I'm not sure about that. I'm like, well, I'll just become a vegetarian. And this is a parent it's a Russian Jew, and meat is very important in our diet. It's like, no, anything but vegetarian. Fine, I'll buy you kosher meat. So I started keeping kosher. Little by little, I started keeping Shabbat. First my excuse was, hey, I can't do homework today. It's Saturday. I can't write. And so little by little, I started doing that. And then really what changed my life is I took a teen tour with the Zionist youth movement. It's a secular yet right-wing Zionist youth movement called Beitar, started by Zev Jabotinsky in Russia and in Eastern Europe before the State of Israel was created. And I started going to meetings, and I took a teen tour for 6 weeks after freshman year of high school. I went to Stuyvesant High School in Manhattan. And after freshman year, I went on this teen tour, and I can't tell you how much this affected my soul. And I feel for a Jew to go back to Judea, back to the land of Israel, it's similar to an animal that's been raised in a zoo in Central Park, like a lion, but his natural habitat is somewhere in Africa. And it's been raised there, and then its children are born there, and its other children are born, and grandchildren, and it's living in Central Park. So it's a lion, but it's not functioning as a lion as much as it should. It's in the cage, it's freezing in the winter. And then suddenly you bring its great-grandchildren back to Africa to their natural habitat, and they're walking around like, whoa, like they feel something deep. And that's how I felt as a Jew going back to the Holy Land. And even though it's been about 2,000 years since the Romans threw us out, but thank God, with all the miracles that God has made for us and the prophecies coming true, we have come back. And not all of us have come back, but about 50% of the Jewish people are back in the Holy Land. And I felt that. And it was 6 weeks of feeling very emotional, feeling very connected, and especially going to Jerusalem, to the wall, to the Holy Western Wall, and touching those stones and knowing that that's over 2,000 years old. And this is something that the Jewish people have been praying towards for 2,000 years, and we're back. But also, importantly for me, was not only the fact that it's the Holy Land and it's historical, but the fact that we are able to have a country which is our home base, which we have a place to go to, which, God forbid, if somebody in the world decides to attack us or, God forbid, try another Holocaust, we have a place to go to. And we have our own army that God protects us, and God gives us the power to protect ourselves. Unfortunately, in Europe during World War II, we could not protect ourselves because we didn't have an army and we didn't have guns. And the first thing the Germans did was they took away everyone's gun rights, right? Which, God forbid, anyone should take away America's gun rights, but the Americans' gun rights, because those are important. But basically, I just want to say that the fact that we are able to have an army and protect ourselves is really a miracle of God, because otherwise, we would be lost, especially after the Holocaust. We had a community in America, but we would be lost, and thank God we have that. So I happen to be a single dad. I have a daughter who's now 19. I was divorced, but then I raised her, and in New York. And I kind of educated her whole life with a very strong love of the Holy Land, love of Israel. And I told her, when Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes, all the Jewish synagogues around the world will come and be relocated to the Holy Land, and all the Jewish people will come back. And I was told her that we want to go back, and we will go back. So she kind of beat me to it, and she moved last August to Israel. She's living in the north, about an hour north of Nazareth, in a city called Tzfat, which is one of the holy cities. She's living there in the old city. She's getting ready to do either national service or the Israeli army. Thank God. And that's it. I'm going. I'm going as well. I've always wanted to go, and for some reason, things, whatever, it's, visitation, custody, all that, so I wasn't able to go. Now I'm able to go. I'm going, thank God. I'm very excited about it. So just want to say, gives me a lot of joy that communities such as yours exist. It gives me a lot of joy that there are Christians who love the Jewish people, love Israel, who know the truth of the Torah, that it comes directly from God. And I want to give all of you a blessing. It says that the people of Israel have a special power to bless the nation, so I'm just going to give you guys a blessing. So anyone who is single, the guy will bless you to meet your soulmate very soon and start families and be very, very happy. That's the number one blessing I'm giving you guys. And the other blessing is those who have children and grandchildren. God willing, you will have a lot of joy from your children. Your children will be a source of joy, and your grandchildren. And we say in Hebrew, ken yirbu, there should be many. They say, be fruitful and multiply. May this congregation be fruitful and multiply. May your attendance increase at least tenfold. And God bless your pastor. You guys are incredible. And we need more people like you in America. And God needs more people like you in America. So God bless you. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Zelig. Isn't that exciting? Anyway, we just met a few weeks ago, but it's great. All right, anyway, so what are we doing today? So first of all, I want to start out by bringing you up to date on what's going on in Israel, particularly with regard to this new government. And I'm sure you're reading all about it, right? And I really don't want to talk about all the demonstrations because that's very boring. Can we just throw that away? Boring. Yeah, thank you. But I tell you, there is cause for great optimism with this new government. And so let me tell you first, let me start with a story about a community that I absolutely adore, okay? It's a community called Avigail. It is south of Hebron, and it's very small, and it's a community that is considered illegal, okay? Now, it's very funny. Like, I read an article, I think it was in the New York Times, one of these newspapers that just love Israel, and it was talking about this announcement that just came out a few days ago from the current government, that the government is planning on legalizing 9 illegal settlements. Now, I have to laugh when I read that kind of thing. I mean, of course, it's great, but I'll explain. Because this is the same New York Times that thinks all the communities in Judea and Samaria are illegal. Right. So as I was reading this, I'm thinking, how did they exactly, maneuver that one, But I think then I went back and I read it, and I said, they want to legal or authorize or something like that communities that are considered to be illegal in Israel. They get around that, because if they just said illegal, then they really shoot themselves in the foot. But whatever. The communities in Judea and Samaria are legal. Did you know that? Really legal. They're also biblical. Really biblical. You got it. Okay, but what I do want to do is explain what is this all about. So let's go back to Avigail. Avigail is a community that has been around for 20 years. Okay? Now, the communities in Judea and Samaria were founded after the 6-7 war, and I gave you brochures, and I'm not going to go into it because you've heard me talk about it. If you haven't, the brochures I gave you, read it, look at the map, okay, and then let me know if you really don't know what I'm talking about, and I'll send you a link to a video that I made that gives you the whole story, and then you can listen to it 5-6 times, and then I can give you a test on it. Nah, I won't do that. I wouldn't do that. Anyway, so these communities were started, a few after 67, but most of them were started after 1977, when Menachem Begin became the first Likud prime minister of Israel, and it became a government policy to encourage Jews to go live in Judea and Samaria. And most of the communities that you see today, well, Kedumim, by the way, which you love and are going to visit very soon, that was started before. That was an example of just an initiative of individuals who pushed and pushed and pushed. It took them 8 tries. It was only on the 8th attempt that finally they got grudging permission for 30 families to go live in an army camp, okay? And then from there, they basically stayed in this army camp. They moved up the hill. So when Menachem Begin became prime minister, one of the most important things that happened, even before he actually became prime minister, but when he was elected, already the results had come out. This is an amazing story. Have you ever you heard that story about how Menachem Begin came to Kedumim? You know that story, right? Anyway, so he came to Kedumim, and he gets up there in the center, what's today like the center of the town, but then it was just a place, right? And he made this announcement that resonated all over the world. At the time, the people settling Kedumim were called Elon Moreh. They were called the Elon Moreh group, the Oak of Moreh group. And so he got up there, and he says, I'm so glad to be here. Here, Elon Moreh, you're reestablishing a Jewish presence near where Abraham, first heard the promise. And he said, and I pledge there will be many more Elon Morehs. Now, that was a statement that literally reverberated around the world, and the world really did not like that statement because they had enough trouble with the individual communities here. And then you have a prime minister that announces to everybody that this is one of the first things he's going to do, and he did. So built communities, they built. And then when Menachem Begin resigned from being a prime minister, and Yitzhak Shamir took over, it was still the Likud, and they built and built and built. And that took us into the mid-'80s. And starting about in the mid-'80s, there was a real slowdown because there was an increase in pressure, especially from the United States, increase in pressure here, really pressuring Israel not to build more communities. And so things kind of slowed down. And at some point, there was an actual decision taken. And there are people that ascribe it to an agreement that was made between Ariel Sharon and Netanyahu. Ariel Sharon and Bush. The first President Bush, I think. HW. Oh, HW? Right, you're right. Okay, anyway, the agreement was no new communities, and the existing communities will only be expanded within the existing settled part of the community. But the other side of the agreement was the Americans had pledged themselves that they were going to stand by Israel in certain specific ways, okay? The Americans breached that, and this is when Obama became president. The Americans breached that. And then when people called Obama on, called him on this, he denied that agreement ever existed. And they all denied it, okay. But meanwhile, what was the effect of this? That for years, the Israeli government has not allowed new communities. And this is even though Netanyahu, who is right-wing, has been prime minister 15 years altogether. And yet, he did not allow new communities. And he only allowed the expansion of existing communities, for the most part, when the Palestinians made him angry. And then he would use that as an excuse, okay? So for example, the Palestinians went to the United Nations in order to put forth a resolution to condemn Israel about something or to be recognized as a state or whatever. And Netanyahu would say, well, that's a breach of the Oslo Accords or whatever. I'm now going to authorize 5,000 new housing units. And this is what's been going on. So it's good in the sense that we have grown, and now there are more than 500,000 Jews living in Judea and Samaria, which is great. But meanwhile, two things have happened. Number one, there's no new communities, which means there's vast areas of land that don't belong to anybody. It's not land that belonged to the Arabs. We are very firm in this. We are not building communities on land that belongs to Arabs. If Arabs own land and they have a home there or they're cultivating the land, nobody wants to disturb that. We want to honor and respect their land. However, what's happened is it created a vacuum. And as a result of this vacuum, the Palestinians put forth a plan of their own. And this is actually an official program of the Palestinian Authority. Now, under Oslo, Judea and Samaria was divided into 3 regions: Area A, Area B, and Area C. Area A was given to the exclusive jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority. Area B is supposedly shared. Things have changed a little bit since these agreements because of terrorism, the Israeli army goes into both Area A and B all the time. But in both Area A and B, Israel has absolutely no civilian authority, which means the Palestinian Authority has total jurisdiction to build as many houses, businesses, schools. They can do whatever they want in areas A and B. And if you look at your map, you'll see the brown areas and the solid yellow areas. That's Area A and B. It's a lot of land. What did the Palestinian Authority do? They decided, why should we be bothering to build an Area A and B? It's ours anyway. Okay? They have a program to build an Area C. Area C is the part of Judea and Samaria that is under exclusive Israeli control. All of the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria are in Area C. So the Palestinians said, number one, we're going to put all our efforts in building an Area C where it is illegal for them to build under the very agreements they signed. Okay? Number two, we're going to look for the places where building Palestinian communities will be a strategic asset for the Palestinian Authority, which means what? Choking off an existing Jewish community. If you have a Jewish community here, and again, what are we saying? That Israeli government has authorized the expansion of those communities in very limited proportions, and usually not expanding beyond the perimeter that already exists. Expanding the number of people living there, expanding the housing, but filling in the gaps in between, as opposed to saying, okay, we want to go out an additional kilometer in this direction, and fill it with new neighborhoods. Very little of that is being done. The Palestinians are taking advantage of this, and this is where they want to put their houses, and they start building things, etc. So already 20 years ago, before this was being done in such an elaborate way on the part of the Palestinians, it got much worse, there were people that said, we can't stand by. And they started to set up communities. And these are the illegal communities. Why are they illegal? Because the Israeli government has not signed that final authorization to approve it. Now, I'll give you an example of one illegal community, so to speak. Okay? In my community of Karnei Shomron, many years ago already, there was a terrible terrorist attack. And in my community, we're called Karnei Shomron, means the horns of Samaria, because there are these 2 mountains at the edge of the community. Okay, up there, you see them as you come. And if you go to Dumim, you pass Karnei Shomron, you see those mountains. Okay? So on one mountain, this is a mountain that the land was purchased many years ago by a family named Zar, and he has a house there. And he had 8 children. And the next hill over, he also bought, but they never settled it. So his son, his oldest son, was murdered in a terrorist attack. Now, Moshe Zar, the father, was very, very close friends with Ariel Sharon. This is going back when Ariel Sharon was prime minister, many, many years ago. And Ariel Sharon came to make a condolence call to the Zar family when this oldest son was murdered. And he came to the family, and he said to his friend Moshe Zar, tell me, Moshe, how can I help you? What do you need? How can I help you? And Moshe answered him, you see that hill over there next to my hill? That's also my hill. I have been trying for years to get permission to build a neighborhood on that hill. And I'm not getting it. I want to build a neighborhood on that hill and call it Ramat Gilad, named after my son Gilad. And in fact, I have owned land all over the place in Samaria. I want to put 7 additional communities and call them all something or other with the name Gilad in it. I want them all in memory of my son. The next day, Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, sent 2 caravans, 2 mobile homes, to that hill. And right after the family got up from Shiva, from the mourning period, the oldest daughter in the family, Michal, went with her 9 children and settled in this caravan on a hilltop. And that was the beginning of that community. Now, that is an illegal outpost. An illegal outpost that was started by the Prime Minister of Israel. Does that make sense? No. So you have all these different kinds of communities that have started where the government is basically dealing with it in the same kind of crazy way. On the one hand, they'll put soldiers there to guard. On the other hand, they'll help them have water, all kinds of things. But on the other hand, it's illegal. And why is it illegal? So that the Prime Minister of Israel can then say, when the President of the United States phones up Netanyahu and says, what about that community? He can say, what community? You know that one over there. He says, but it's not, it's illegal. What do you mean it's illegal? It's been there for 10 years. Yeah, but it's illegal. Well, if it's illegal, why aren't you moving it? Oh, well, you know. But he can then say, I never signed on it. It's not legal, but it's all a game. The problem is with this game is that it's extremely difficult for the people living here. So Abigail, I started telling you about Abigail. How did Abigail begin? There's a couple of guys, very dedicated. This area south of Hebron, there are Bedouins coming in from the Negev, there are Palestinians coming in from Hebron, and they are just taking over the place. And this is a very important hilltop, very strategically located. And if we have people living on that hilltop, it can break that flow of the Bedouins from the Negev and the Palestinians from Hebron and trying to choke off the other communities in that area. So these fellows, what they do, they took a bus. They drove it up to the hill, parked it there, and said, here we have a community. And they lived in a bus. Well, the bus, you know, they could hook it up to electricity, whatever. They lived in a bus, okay? You call that dedication. They were single guys, okay? Anyway, that's how it started. And from that bus, little by little, they started building. They brought some mobile homes, and they built some prefab homes. And little by little, over the years, it developed. They built a little synagogue. Some of the people there have built homes. All of this is illegal. You can't get a mortgage for these homes because it's not a legal community. So some of them take out mortgages on their parents' houses, you know, because I was like, and how they do this, I don't know. But the important thing that's really difficult for these people is that they don't have electricity. I mean, they have electricity. They use generators. They have pirated hookups to the neighboring community. But the Israel Electric Company cannot connect it officially to the grid unless it isn't a 100% legal community. And they don't have that piece of paper. They don't have electricity, which means that on Monday, so-and-so can use a washing machine, and on Tuesday, someone else can use the washing machine. And if you want to use your heat in the winter, you're definitely limited in who can use it and for how long. It is very cold up there. It is not Florida. It is on a hilltop. Winds are insane. These people are devoted. Dozens of families live there now, devoted. So a few weeks ago, it's a community we work very closely with, and we actually raised money for them for 2 very important projects recently. A youth center, a little building, and it's lovely. When you come, if you have time, I'd love to show it to you. Just a lovely youth center, because now all of a sudden, they've been there for 20 years. So the first guys were bachelors, then they got married, they had babies. So today, they're kids 14, 15, 16 years old. So a youth center. And we also gave them money for security, for surveillance cameras and the monitoring station, all that stuff. They're like over the moon. Okay, and then a few weeks ago, I get a call from the head of the community. I don't know what we're going to do. We don't electricity. It's constantly blowing. The generators, it's not enough. I don't know what to do. We need electricity. And I'm worried because every time there's a storm, the electricity goes out, and it's freezing, and we have little babies, and what are we going to do? And I said, I can't help you. I can raise money for security cameras, but I can't give them electricity. So a few days ago, now these are communities, Avigal's one example, and it's one of the oldest of these communities, but they're dozens of these communities all over Judea and Samaria, different sizes, and they all face the same issue. They need to be legalized so that they can have proper electricity and proper water, so they can get building permits, so they can develop, so that they can have garbage collection, so that they can have streets and sidewalks and all the normal things that communities have. And what they've been doing at amazing expense that they're putting in on their own and whatever. They're so dedicated. Netanyahu promised several times in the past few years that he was going to legalize all of them. And now, in the new government, with this coalition that includes 14 members of Knesset that are from a right-wing, settlement-oriented party that is pushing Netanyahu from the right, into the right. And that's very good. So the first result of this was just a few days ago, the government announced they will be legalizing 9 of these communities, and Avigal is one of them. Isn't that unbelievable? So this is just to bring you up to date. I am optimistic. I think that this government really wants to do a lot of good things. The judicial reform I'm in favor of. I do think they need to have reach some kind of consensus, and it's possible to have consensus. Everyone's got to stop screaming and yelling and protesting, and this is not the end of democracy. Okay, there's a lot of good that is involved in the judicial reform. But for me, the most important thing is this idea of expanding the communities, giving us freedom of movement, and little by little moving us towards sovereignty. That's also something Netanyahu had promised, to extend Israeli sovereignty to Judea and Samaria. And that is, of course, a big political problem for a number of different reasons. One of the things they want to do now is to change, not to make any announcements of extending sovereignty, but some of the problems that we have because we are not sovereign can be resolved in other ways. And so the idea is to resolve these other ways with certain legal adjustments that gives us effective sovereignty without making announcements. That's good. We don't need to make announcements. We just need to make sure that people living in Judea and Samaria have the same rights as the Jews everywhere else in Israel. And we need to have an attitude of moving forward, growing, and expanding. Right? So we now have 500,000 Jews. We want 1 million Jews in Judea and Samaria. Okay. Now I want to conclude with some thoughts from the Bible. And, when I come to a place like this, you've heard me teach all the basic teachings about why Jews belong in the land of Israel, so I don't need to do any of that. So where do I go to? I go to the Torah portion. And this Torah portion coming up is the Torah portion called Mishpatim. And if you read Mishpatim, there's an awful lot of laws. Now, when we were kids, we would make fun. There's laws having to do with, in Hebrew, it's called shor and bor. Shor is an ox and a bor is a pit. So these laws of what happens if your ox gores the neighbor's ox or gores the neighbor, or if someone falls into a pit. And these issues become the subject of great debates in the Talmud. I am not going to talk about oxes and pits tonight. Believe me. We could, but we'd be here all night, and it's not very interesting. But I did, as I'm reading through, I found some stuff that's really amazing. Okay? So, first of all, this Torah portion takes place right after Revelation at Sinai. And so, in addition to some of these, a lot of these laws, that as part of the laws that God is teaching Moses that he's going to teach to the nation of Israel, and these laws, by the way, are about founding a just society, how people need to relate to one another, how justice is done in the case of problems, is very, very important laws, other than the ox and the pit. But anyway, but then there's a few interesting things here that I want to focus on. So first of all, God says at one point that he's going to send an angel in front of the nation, and that angel will call it a guardian angel. That's the angel that's going to help them conquer the land and look out for them and make sure everything will be okay as they go into the land of Israel. Don't forget, at this point, they think they're going to the land of Israel within a few weeks. Okay, the golden calf hasn't happened yet, okay? So that's going on here. And then you have the statements about the importance of, going into the land of Israel aggressively, cleaning out these nations that are problematic. And there's this whole idea here that you have to get rid of these nations, because if you leave them in the land, they will become a snare. And that idea of a snare is repeated later on in Deuteronomy, for example. 40 years later, Moses repeats the same thing. If you leave these nations in the land, they will be a negative influence. They will pull you into pagan worship. And yet, in the middle of that whole discussion, we have something that's very interesting, where God says, I will not drive them out of the land in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and filled up with wild animals. Little by little, I will expel them before you until you will be able to be fruitful and take possession of the land. So on the one hand, you have this idea of you got to get rid of these nations because you got to make sure there's no negative influence. And yet at the same time, God is saying it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight, okay? And when I think about that, it's a process, I'm thinking, isn't that what we're dealing with now? There is a saying that we say in Hebrew, Yeshuat Hashem keheref ayin. The salvation of the Lord is like the blink of an eye. And I've always thought about that. What do you mean like a blink of an eye? We've been waiting on salvation for a very long time. It doesn't feel like a blink of an eye. And even since the establishment of the state of Israel, where we really feel we're really there. I mean, it's coming. It's been 75 years. That's no blink of an eye. So one of the things that I believe in that statement is that it is a blink in the eye in God's time. Because for God, it goes, he's kind of God of history and God of time, and what's this for him? It's a nothing, okay? And yet for us, it's a process. And I think what God is telling us here, on the one hand, it is a process. There are no easy, instantaneous solutions. You're going to have to deal with these nations. You're going to have to deal with challenges. And if we talk about what we're dealing with today, we're going to deal with terrorists. We're going to deal with all kinds of people. We're going to deal with a world all around us that is hostile, that is telling us it is not legal for you to be there. You have no right to the land. And we're going to be dealing with all of that. It is a process. No, we're not going to be able to get rid of them all at once. It will happen. It will happen eventually, but it's not going to be all at once. But throughout that process, we have to make sure that we are not influenced by the snares. And today, frankly, I'm not concerned about learning pagan worship from our Muslim neighbors. That's not our challenge. What is our challenge? Post-Zionism. People who have been so influenced by they're tired of the conflict. They're tired. And so it's so much easier to say, well, you know what? Maybe we'll give up a little bit. We're tired. The people in Avigail could have so easily said, I'm tired of taking turns when I can use my washing machine. I'm tired. That's what a snare is. It's the snare that comes in and niggles at you and says, you don't have to keep up with your goal. In the Bible, you don't have to stick with this belief in God and keeping with your mission. No, in Avigail, you don't have to keep on your mission of settling the land. But no, the people of Avigail know they're there because they believe in God. And they know that God wants them to be doing this because we are recognizing that everything that's happened since Israel was established 75 years ago is a miracle. And we need to grab onto that miracle and do something with it. And that means settling in Avigail. We have to remember, though, it's a process. You have to have patience. And it's only because those people in Avigail were there for 20 years, taking turns on their washing machines, and now hopefully they're going to have a normal life. No, it doesn't happen overnight. And now there's something else I want to point out. Moses, after he says some of these laws, he's finally going up to Sinai himself. We have the revelation. He's going up to Mount Sinai. And he says here, at the very end of the Torah portion, God calls to him to go up. He goes up. And it says as follows. Moses went up to the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. And the glory of God rested on Mount Sinai, and it covered it. The cloud covered it for 6 days. And then he called to Moses on the 7th day from within the cloud. And then Moses went into the cloud, he went up to the mountain, and Moses was up on that mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. You know this, right? But this is a beautiful, beautiful description of Moses ascending the mountain. God, through this cloud, represented by this cloud, is covering the mountain. Moses can't just walk in. Hey, God, how you doing? He stands out there waiting. And then God beckons him and he comes in. We have the identical situation described at the very end of the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus ends with the building of the tabernacle. And at the very end of the book of Exodus, the final verses, what does it say? And the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of God filled the tabernacle. Moses could not go into the tent of meeting because the cloud was resting upon it, and the glory of God filled the tabernacle. So I'm skipping the next two verses, they're not relevant. And then it continues to say, because the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle during the day, fire at night, to the eyes of all the house of Israel and all their travels. And that's how it ends. What happens to Moses? Is he still out there? Turn the page, and you go to the beginning of Leviticus. And the Lord called to Moses, and the Lord spoke to him from the tent of meeting. And there's a wonderful commentary that says this is the connection. This is the continuation. Moses is standing outside. He does not enter the tent of meeting until God calls to him from within the tent of meeting, and then he beckons him in. And then Moses enters, and then, of course, we have all the laws of Leviticus that God tells Moses from within the tent of meeting. So what does this mean? This parallel here. There's something really interesting here about the tabernacle paralleling Sinai. And in fact, there are commentaries that talk about the fact that the purpose of the tabernacle was to enable Sinai to live within us, within the Jewish people forever. Revelation at Sinai was a one-time event. And of course, Moses going up into the cloud, that's Moses. Nobody else did that, right? So you can say, oh, that's history. We'll remember it. We'll honor it. We read the Ten Commandments. It's very nice. But God said, no, that's not enough for you. You need a way to experience Sinai every single day. And for that reason, you're going to have a tabernacle. God says, I'm going to build a tabernacle. You should build a tabernacle so that I will dwell within them. Right. Not within it. Right. The tabernacle is a vehicle so that God can reside within us, within each of us, within all of us, so that God's presence remains amongst us, so that we remember and we're conscious of God's presence at all times, and we remember what our obligations are. Now, I know that you're going to go, those of you who are going to Israel, you're probably also going to go up to the Temple Mount. What happens to the tabernacle? It becomes the temple, right? And actually, there's a whole debate in Judaism as to whether you go up to the Temple Mount or not, and if you go up to the Temple Mount, where you go. And if you're going to go with Yehuda Glick, he's going to only take you to a certain part of the Temple Mount. He's not going to tell you to the rest. You know why? Because the rest of the Temple Mount is places that could have been the Holy of Holies, which is the tent of meeting, which is where the cloud of God, where the glory of God rested, and we don't go into that place unless God specifically calls us in. And we learn from Leviticus that the only person who was allowed to go in was the high priest once a year on the Day of Atonement. What does all this mean? God gave us the ability to take his presence into our lives. It's not just about what happened at Revelation and Sinai, thunder, lightning, all kinds of crazy things, right? One-time things, supernatural things. If your faith in God is about supernatural thunder and lightning and fireworks, you know how long it will last? How long did it take until the children of Israel built the golden calf after Revelation and Sinai? A few hours? No, it took a few days. It was after they saw Moses. 40 days. 40 days. That's how long it lasted. 40 days or 38 days or whatever. If you don't find a way to bring God's presence into your community, into your hearts, it doesn't last. And for us in Israel, if we are going to build the land without realizing that God has to be within us, that we need to be following his way, we need to be building a land that is centered around God. We need to be viewing the events in Israel as miracles. We need to understand what God is doing with us, that it's a process. It's not overnight, little by little. But you know what? We are able to have patience with the process if God is constantly in our minds and in our hearts. If we have brought God into our presence. If we have built a little tabernacle in each of our hearts and souls. And of course, we're learning for the day. All of us, are waiting for Messiah. We have a bit of a difference of opinion about who he is and whether he's been before, but that's okay. We are looking for a time that the entire world will recognize God in our midst, okay? But until that time, it's up to all of us, you and me. As we're building the land of Israel, we have this constant feel that this is what God wants us to be doing, and that is what is driving us. And as you stand with us, like Pastor said, what is Zionism? Zionism is God's love for the land and people of Israel, and it's your love for God that brings out all of us together. As long as we can hold that within us, walk together, build the land together, I believe that together we are bringing the ultimate redemption closer than ever before. Amen?